The salesman's laughter echoed until one revelation silenced the room and ended his career asterisk. The afternoon sun leaned low in the sky, spilling golden light across the city's wide streets. Through the spotless glass walls of a luxury car dealership, the rays danced and shimmered, reflecting off the hoods of polished sedans and gleaming sports cars. The building itself looked more like a cathedral than a showroom. Vaulted ceilings, chrome details, and pristine tiles that mirrored the light in every direction. It wasn't just a place to sell cars. It was a stage, built for power, money, and appearances. Inside, the air carried a particular blend of scents, the intoxicating aroma of leather seats, the faint chemical sweetness of freshly waxed paint, and the sharp tang of machine oil hidden beneath it all. Salesmen, each dressed in sleek suits, drifted around the floor like actors waiting for their cue. Their eyes darted constantly, first to the glittering cars, then to the people walking in, scanning for their next commission. Each customer who entered became a calculation, a potential sale, a paycheck. Their smiles could switch on and off in an instant, bright when opportunity appeared, cold when it didn't. The door opened, and in stepped Michael. He moved with quiet composure, his figure tall and deliberate. His clothing was neat but modest, a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, dark tailored trousers, shoes that were clean but unremarkable. On his wrist, a brown leather watch gleamed faintly in the light. Nothing about him screamed wealth. He did not flash a gold chain or brand-name jacket. Instead, his presence carried a subtler weight and unspoken calm, the kind of confidence that didn't need to shout. As the glass door clicked shut behind him, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Two salesmen standing near the counter exchanged a glance. One arched a brow, the other smirked faintly before turning away. A receptionist who had been busy typing slowed her movements, her eyes flicking toward him before quickly back to her screen. A man browsing brochures at the desk paused just long enough to take notice, then bent his head again. It wasn't what anyone said, it was the silence that spoke. The faint hush of whispers carried like dust in sunlight, subtle but undeniable. In a room built for opulence and indulgence, Michael seemed, to them, out of place. But Michael didn't flinch. His gaze swept across the showroom floor, moving from one shining vehicle to the next. Each car looked like a piece of sculpture, sleek lines, flawless curves, chrome rims that caught the light like a blade. He walked slowly, his shoes making soft taps against the marble floor, studying details others might not even notice. The stitching on the leather, the way a headlight curved like glass art, the way the steering wheel seemed to command attention even at rest. If he heard the whispers, he ignored them. If he noticed the lingering stares, his face did not reveal it. There was only calm curiosity in his eyes, as though he was measuring not just the cars, but the very atmosphere around him. And yet, there was an undercurrent, a tension barely beneath the surface. The salesman who had pounced eagerly on other customers just moments before did not move toward him. Their bodies stayed angled away, as though he were invisible, or worse, an interruption. Their smiles, so easy and eager for others, did not extend to him. Michael paused near a gleaming black sedan parked under the spotlight. The car's polished bodywork reflected his figure back at him, tall and strong. He rested his hand lightly on the side mirror, feeling the cool surface beneath his fingertips. For a moment, the sunlight caught on the glass above, framing him in gold. In that instant, he looked entirely at home, calm, unshaken, belonging. But the silence from the staff told a different story. The stage was set. A man who carried dignity had entered a room that had already judged him before a word was spoken. For a long moment, Michael stood unbothered in the silence, examining the car under the spotlight. The room buzzed faintly with the hum of the air conditioner and the murmur of other customers, but still no salesman came to him. Then, finally, the sharp click of polished shoes echoed across the marble floor. Mr. Harris. He approached with the swagger of a man who believed he already knew the ending of this encounter. Slim, well-dressed in a gray suit, with hair slicked back until it gleamed. Harris carried himself with the air of someone who thought the world revolved around his approval. His smile, at first glance, might have looked professional, but the corners of his mouth were stiff, strained. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon," Harris said, his voice coated with artificial sweetness. He gave Michael a quick, sweeping look, shoes to shirt, then back to his face, as if calculating worth in a single glance. Then his tone shifted, colder, sharper. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The words hung in the air, slicing through the quiet. Michael slowly turned his head, meeting Harris's gaze. His expression was calm, unshaken. "Yes," he said simply, his voice low and steady. "I'm in the right place." Harris chuckled under his breath, the sound dismissive, not humorous. He gestured loosely toward the sedan under the spotlight. "These models," he said, tapping the roof with his knuckles, "start at a price most people would call outrageous. Maybe you'd be more comfortable checking out a smaller lot down the street, something more, let's say, manageable." His eyes glimmered with condescension. Every syllable dripped with the assumption that Michael didn't belong. Nearby, a couple browsing brochures glanced up, sensing the tension but quickly looking away. A young man polishing the car in the corner slowed his work, his cloth frozen mid-wipe. The silence of bystanders was almost louder than Harris's words. Michael inhaled slowly, his hand still resting lightly on the car's mirror. He could have walked away. He could have fired back. But instead, he chose the path of composure. His voice, when it came, was polite, even gentle, yet it carried a weight that pressed against the air. "I was curious about this sedan," Michael said evenly. "Could you tell me about its performance, its safety features, and warranty options?" Harris blinked, momentarily unsettled by the seriousness of the question. He quickly recovered, forcing a smirk. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Those details are usually reserved for serious buyers." He folded his arms, tilting his head as though amused by the idea. "I'm just trying to save you some time." Michael's lips curved ever so slightly, not into a smile, but into something sharper, a quiet acknowledgement of the insult wrapped in Harris's false courtesy. His eyes held steady, dark and unwavering, meeting Harris's smugness without flinching. His words, calm but laced with strength, fell into the silence. "Time," he said softly, "is the one thing I never waste." For the first time, Harris faltered. Michael's eyes roamed the showroom until they settled on a gleaming, silver sedan positioned like a crown jewel under the lights. Its chrome details shimmered, its polished body reflecting the overhead chandeliers like liquid metal. He stepped closer, tilting his head, absorbing the craftsmanship with a calm appreciation that only grew stronger the longer he studied it. "This one," Michael said, his hand brushing the air just above the hood, as though he didn't want to disturb the car's shine. His tone was steady, thoughtful. "Tell me about the horsepower, the safety features." And he paused, glancing back at Harris. "What financing options are available?" The request was clear, direct, the kind of inquiry any genuine customer would make. But Harris reacted with a soft, incredulous laugh. It wasn't loud enough to be called rude outright, but it carried a weight that sliced through the air like a whispered insult. His hand rose to his mouth, as if he were trying to stifle amusement, but his eyes gleamed with open derision. "Horsepower?" Harris repeated, as though the word itself sounded absurd in Michael's mouth. He leaned casually against the sedan, tapping a finger along the door handle. Well, that's really more of a conversation for someone seriously considering this car. You know, someone who's ready to sign paperwork today." Michael didn't flinch. His gaze lingered on Harris, calm yet unyielding. "And what makes you think I'm not serious?" The question landed with quiet weight. Harris smirked, shrugging as though it were self-evident. He gestured vaguely toward Michael's modest attire, his plain button-down shirt, the scuffed but well-kept shoes. "Let's just say," Harris replied lightly, You don't exactly strike me as the target buyer. The words rolled out smooth, coated in politeness, but the venom underneath was unmistakable. Across the room, the couple who had been browsing brochures shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Michael and Harris. The young man polishing the car stopped again, his cloth still, as though afraid any movement might draw attention. Even one of Harris's colleagues, stationed a few steps away, bit his lip but said nothing. Silence hung in the air like a heavy curtain, and the weight of judgment pressed down on Michael from every side. Harris chuckled again, shaking his head as if it were all a misunderstanding. "Look, no offense," he added, though offense had already been dealt. "I just don't want to waste your time or mine. This sedan? It's out of most people's league. But there's a dealership across town that might be better suited for practical budgets." Michael's hand tightened slightly against the edge of the hood. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it betrayed the storm brewing just beneath his composed exterior. His patience, already stretched thin, was being tested with every word that dripped from Harris's mouth, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue, didn't snap, didn't match arrogance with anger. Instead, he inhaled, slow and deliberate, letting the air steady him. His eyes remained fixed on Harris, not with hostility, but with the kind of focus that made the salesman shift uncomfortably in his shoes. "Interesting," Michael said at last, his voice smooth, almost casual. "You seem very confident in your ability to judge a man's worth at a glance." Harris laughed again, though this time the sound was thinner, forced. He straightened his jacket, his smirk faltering just slightly. "It's just experience," he said quickly. "You learn to read people in this business. Trust me, I know who's serious and who's wasting my time." Michael tilted his head, studying him with quiet curiosity, as though Harris himself were now the one on display. "I see," he murmured, his voice carrying the calm of a man who was not defeated, only waiting. Around them, the silence deepened. Other customers sensed it too, the imbalance of dignity and disrespect playing out in front of them. Some frowned at Harris's tone, others avoided eye contact altogether. But Michael stood there, composed and unwavering, like a man who had weathered storms far greater than one salesman's prejudice, and though Harris didn't know it yet, the storm he had just awakened would change everything. Michael didn't bristle at Harris's words. He didn't snap, didn't storm out in outrage. Instead, he stood there with a calm that seemed almost out of place, his presence quiet but commanding. Where another man might have flushed with humiliation, Michael's expression carried something else, an odd confidence, even a flicker of amusement at the corners of his lips. It unsettled Harris. Salesman cleared his throat and straightened his tie, trying to regain control of the moment. "Like I said," he muttered, "this sedan isn't really meant for everyone." "No harm in being realistic." Michael tilted his head, studying him as though Harris were the one under a spotlight. His voice came smooth, steady, and measured. "Tell me," he said, "is this how your dealership treats all its customers? Or just some of them?" The question was deceptively simple, but it landed with weight. Conversations around the showroom seemed to pause, if only for a heartbeat. The young man polishing the SUV in the corner froze again, his rag suspended midair. Even the couple browsing brochures glanced up, caught by the sharpness under Michael's polite tone. Harris let out a short, dismissive laugh, trying to shake it off. "You're reading too much into this," he said, brushing invisible dust from the car's hood. "I know who belongs here. I've been in this business long enough to tell who's serious and who's wasting my time." His words hung in the air, arrogant and final, as if he believed they carried the authority of a judge delivering a sentence. He smirked as he leaned against the sedan, arms folded, but Michael did not flinch. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with a piercing clarity that seemed to look right through Harris. He let the silence stretch before speaking again, his tone calm but laced with something more deliberate. "Belonging," he said softly. is an interesting word. He glanced around the dealership, his gaze drifting past the polished floors and the meticulously waxed cars. The chandeliers above reflected in the glossy paint, throwing shards of light across the marble. His eyes lingered on the dealership's logo, etched proudly into the glass wall near the entrance. To most, it was just a sleek emblem, a polished brand. But the way Michael looked at it, quiet, almost knowing, hinted at a secret only he carried. It was as though the logo itself whispered a story, invisible to everyone else in the room. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more a trace of private recognition. Harris noticed the glance but misread it entirely. "Admiring the logo, huh?" he said smugly, mistaking Michael's expression for intimidation. "That emblem represents prestige, legacy. Not everyone can walk in here and expect to fit that image," he chuckled, a hollow sound that scraped against the air. Michael's eyes returned to him, calm but unreadable. "Legacy," he echoed softly, as though tasting the word. His voice was neither defensive nor meek, but steady in a way that made Harris shift in place. A faint tension rippled across the room. No one could quite name it, but the customers, the attendants, even Harris's colleagues felt it, the sense that something beneath the surface was shifting, that Michael's silence held more weight than Harris's laughter. Harris, oblivious, pressed on, convinced of his authority. "See, I can tell when someone is out of their depth. It's nothing personal. I just know who belongs here." Michael's gaze lingered on him for a long moment, then drifted back once more to the logo gleaming on the glass. His expression softened into something unreadable, the barest flicker of amusement lighting his eyes again. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He only stood, composed and patient, like a man content to let time reveal what words could not. And though Harris didn't realize it, that patience was the most dangerous answer of all. Harris leaned back slightly, lips parting as if ready to deliver one last neatly packaged dismissal. His tone was already sharpening, into that polite but poisonous cadence he'd perfected over years of deciding who belonged and who didn't. The smirk hovered on his face like a mask he was confident would never be removed, but before he could speak, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed across the showroom floor. The rhythm was uneven, frantic, so unlike the smooth, rehearsed stroll of a salesman. All heads turned as the dealership's general manager, Mr. Carter, rushed toward them. His complexion was pale, his tie askew as though he had abandoned paperwork mid-sentence. When his eyes landed on Michael, they widened. His breath caught, and then he straightened his jacket with trembling fingers before breaking into a strained but respectful smile. "Mr. Johnson," Carter said, his voice ringing across the polished floor. We didn't expect you today." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Couple who had been flipping through brochures froze, their jaws slack. The young attendant polishing the car nearly dropped his cloth, his knuckles white around it. Even the air itself seemed to shift, charged with the electricity of revelation. Mr. Harris blinked, his smirk collapsing into confusion. "Wait, what did you just say?" he stammered, glancing between Carter and Michael. Carter ignored him. His entire focus was on Michael now, posture bent slightly in deference. "Had I known you were visiting, sir, we would have prepared properly. The staff would have been briefed." His voice cracked with nervousness, betraying the dread rolling through him. Michael stood perfectly still, calm as ever, his hands resting loosely at his sides. There was a faint trace of amusement in his eyes, but it was tempered by something deeper, a quiet disappointment that cut sharper than anger ever could. The silence stretched until Michael finally spoke, his voice soft but carrying the weight of authority that needed no raising. "Tell me, Carter," he said evenly, "is this how all your customers are treated? Or just some of them?" Carter swallowed hard. His gaze flicked toward Harris, who had gone rigid, his skin flushed a blotchy red. The room seemed to tilt against him, the marble floor no longer steady beneath his feet. "Sir, please," Harris started, but his words faltered, tripping over themselves. I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were." Michael's expression didn't change. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence alone pressed against Harris like a weight. Carter cleared his throat, stepping in quickly, almost desperately. "Mr. Johnson is not just a valued customer," he announced to the room, as though reminding everyone present of a truth too important to ignore. "He is a silent partner, a major investor in this dealership chain. This showroom," he added pointedly, his eyes flicking to Harris, "exists in part because of him." Gasps rippled through the space. The couple exchanged wide-eyed looks. The young attendant straightened, staring at Michael with newfound respect. And Harris's body stiffened as the reality slammed into him. The man he had mocked, belittled, and tried to push out the door wasn't just another customer he could brush off. He was one of the men who owned the very ground Harris stood on. Michael shifted his gaze toward Harris then, his eyes calm but unyielding. "So tell me," he asked, each word deliberate, "do I still not belong here?" The question struck harder than any raised voice could have. Harris's lips parted, but no sound emerged. The confidence, the smug assurance that had dripped from his every gesture, was gone. In its place was a man unmasked, exposed, trembling in the spotlight he had once believed was his alone. The room held its breath, waiting for Michael's next move. And Harris, for the first time in his career, had nothing to say. The silence after Michael's question was suffocating. Harris's mouth worked as though searching for words, but nothing coherent emerged. The smirk that had once clung to his lips was gone, replaced by a pallor that drained the color from his face. His hands fidgeted at his sides, restless and clumsy, betraying the unraveling of a man who had built his confidence on sand. "Mr. Johnson," Carter said finally, his voice low but stern, each syllable weighed with disappointment. He turned his gaze toward Harris, his expression hardening like stone. "This behavior is unacceptable. I thought I made it clear that professionalism and respect are not negotiable in this showroom. I made it clear that professionalism and respect are not negotiable in the showman respect are not negotiable in this showroom." Weight of his words struck Harris like blows. He stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't know." "If I had known." "That's the problem," Carter snapped, cutting him off, his tone sharper than Michael's ever had to be. "Respect should never hinge on recognition. It should be offered freely, to every single person who walks through those doors." Harris's shoulders slumped, his arrogance collapsing inward, leaving only the hollow shell of a man stripped of certainty. His eyes darted toward Michael, pleading, desperate. "Please." "I didn't mean." Michael raised a hand slightly, not to silence him but to reclaim the space. His posture remained calm, his face composed, yet his presence commanded the room in a way Harris never could. "I don't need your excuses," Michael said, his voice quiet but resonant, carrying to every corner of the dealership. He let the words breathe before continuing, each one deliberate, steady, impossible to ignore. "Respect," he said, "should never depend on the balance of someone's bank account. The way you treated me says more about you than it ever could about me." The room seemed to still further, as though even the air had paused to take in the words. Employees who had been frozen in place straightened subtly, their eyes fixed on Michael. Customers lingered, no longer pretending to look at cars, caught in the gravity of the moment. Harris's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his pride dissolving into fragments he could no longer hold together. He muttered something unintelligible, then fell silent under the crushing weight of his own humiliation. Carter's face was grim. "Enough," he said curtly. "You've embarrassed yourself, this dealership, and the very values we claim to stand on." He gestured sharply toward one of the assistant managers lingering by the office door. "Escort him out. He's finished here." The order struck like a final gavel. Two staff members approached Harris. For a moment, he looked as though he might resist, but his strength was gone, his bravado shattered. His legs carried him weakly toward the exit, his head bowed. Every step was a surrender, each one echoing across the marble floor like the punctuation to his downfall. Michael didn't watch him go with triumph. There was no smirk, no satisfaction in seeing the man stripped of his posturing. Instead, he stood quietly, his gaze steady, his hands resting at his sides. His restraint was its own form of power, a reminder that dignity does not need to roar in order to be felt. As Harris disappeared beyond the glass doors, the dealership floor remained hushed. The staff stood frozen, as though rooted to the spot, their faces etched with the recognition of what they had just witnessed. Michael exhaled slowly, a man not weighed down by what had transpired, but rather lifted by the clarity it brought. His calm presence filled the silence, reminding everyone that true strength is not measured by wealth or status, but by the integrity of how one chooses to act. Carter cleared his throat, his voice softer now, tinged with shame. "Mr. Johnson," he began, "on behalf of the dealership." Michael shook his head gently, sparing him the apology. "Actions speak louder than words," he said, and with that, he turned his gaze once more toward the polished cars under the lights, not as symbols of status, but as reflections of how quickly appearances can deceive. The glass doors of the dealership whispered open as Michael stepped outside. The air was warmer than he remembered, the late afternoon sun spilling across the pavement in golden sheets. Behind him, the polished cars gleamed under the showroom lights, silent witnesses to what had just unfolded. Their shine felt hollow now, stripped of the arrogance they once seemed to symbolize. Michael paused on the steps, his figure framed by the sunlight. He drew a deep breath, letting the fresh air wash over him, grounding him after the suffocating tension he had endured inside. He didn't glance back. There was no need. The image of Harris's crumbling composure, the stunned silence of the staff, and the pale regret etched on Carter's face would linger in that room long after he was gone. He walked forward with steady steps, his shoes clicking softly against the concrete. Passers-by on the street barely noticed him, just a man in a modest shirt and worn shoes, blending into the rhythm of the city. None of them would guess that this was a man whose influence stretched far beyond appearances, a man who held a piece of the very empire he had just been dismissed from. And yet, Michael felt no desire to parade that truth. Power, he knew, was never about proving others wrong with noise or spectacle. True power was in restraint, in dignity, in choosing not to let another person's prejudice rewrite your worth. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of leather and wax from the dealership behind him, mingling with the sharper smell of asphalt warming under the sun. It was a reminder of how fragile appearances were, how easily polished surfaces could hide cracks beneath. Inside the dealership, whispers would grow. Employees would trade glances, questions would be asked, reputations reshaped. Harris's name would not be spoken with respect anymore, but with caution, a cautionary tale of arrogance unmasked. And though Michael had said little, his presence alone had redrawn the boundaries of that space. He reached the edge of the lot, where rows of parked cars shimmered in the sunlight. For a moment, he slowed, watching how the light played across their windshields, blinding and beautiful. His reflection flickered in the glass, ordinary, unremarkable, and yet carrying a story no one could take from him. There was no satisfaction in Harris's downfall, no triumph in seeing him escorted away. Michael hadn't come here to destroy a man's pride. He had come with simple curiosity, with the intention of being treated as any other customer. But life had a way of laying bare what people tried to hide. And now, as he continued down the sidewalk, his posture straight and his expression calm, the weight of the moment crystallized into something larger than himself, because this story wasn't just his. It belonged to every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or humiliated for what they looked like rather than who they were. It belonged to every quiet act of dignity that had risen against arrogance and prejudice. Sun broke free from a thin veil of clouds, flooding the street in radiant gold. Michael's shadow stretched long across the pavement, a silhouette of resilience moving steadily forward. And then, as though closing a chapter, the narration whispered into the silence of the scene. Prejudice is built on assumptions, but truth always unmasks arrogance. A man's worth is not in what he wears or how he looks, but in who he truly is. Respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything. The words lingered, sinking deep into the light-filled air, leaving behind not bitterness, but clarity. And with that, Michael kept walking, his dignity intact, his silence louder than any voice could ever be.